We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt podcast. On this week's episode of the podcast, how are your kids going back to school?
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, the owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a guest for you for this week's episode, and a pretty timely topic if you're listening to this on the day of its release. But before I get there, I do want to mention our sponsor real quick. So like I've been saying for the last couple months, and like I'm going to continue to say for the next couple of months, the sponsor of the show is Sam Cohen at Attorneys First Insurance. So if you're an attorney and you want to quote for errors and omissions insurance, E&O insurance, malpractice insurance, professional liability insurance, all four of those things are the exact same. Go ahead and call Sam Cohen over at Attorneys First. He's the owner of Attorneys First. You can reach him at sam@attorneysfirst.com, or you can visit their website at attorneysfirst.com, and Sam will quote you on malpractice insurance. Now, if he can't quote you, it's probably because you are outside of the state of Florida in a state where he doesn't practice. And so in a situation like that, he'll get licensed in that state, or he'll refer you to someone who can or who is licensed in that state. So contact Sam at attorneysfirst.com or go to their website, attorneysfirst.com. But I want to turn my attention now to this week's episode. So my guest this week, it's a fairly timely topic, and we're going to get into sort of both sides of the equation here. I mean, as I record this, my wife is back at school. She is a teacher, so she's back in her school at her classroom setting up. Now, where I happen to live in Tampa in Hillsborough County, Florida, kids haven't reported yet. And so kids are supposed to report August 24, which is about 3 weeks away from now as we record. And so my wife is back at work. My kids are not back at work, so I'm working from home. And actually, we're hearing rumors that Hillsborough County is going to go to e-learning, regardless of whether you want to go back to school or not. They're going to go to e-learning or remote learning for the first, I think, 3 months until December. So I wanted to talk to my guest today about some of these issues. So let me give you her background. She is a certified elementary school teacher with 22 years of public school experience. She's taught both general education, special education, and 7 years working at the district level as a technology integration specialist. She recently took an early retirement from public school due to the uncertainty of the educational requirements because of COVID-19 and started an educational consulting company to help parents and students understand how to successfully homeschool, distance learn, and perform in-class learning. So very happy to welcome my guest on today's episode, Kellyann Goring. Welcome, Kellyann.
Thank you, Sean.
So I do want to point out you did start a new company. It is called home2schoolconnection.com, or at least that's the website, home2schoolconnection.com, and 2 is the number 2. So HOME, the number 2, SCHOOLCONNECTION.com, home2schoolconnection.com, everything spelled out except for the number 2. And then your email is Kellyann, KELLYANN, at home2schoolconnection.com, the same way. So that's how people can get in touch with you, either Kellyann at home2schoolconnection.com or the website, home2schoolconnection.com. So thank you for being a guest on today's episode. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And you actually can find me on Facebook at the same Home to School Connection on Facebook as well.
Very cool. And for those people that miss it, I will put all this in the notes so that they can capture your contact information that way as well. But, you know, one of the things that you and I discussed pre-interview, one of the things I want to get to sort of right off the bat is this concept of, you know, what do we do with our kids? And so the struggle that me and my wife went through here in making a determination of what to do, you know, she works and I work. And so we didn't feel like we necessarily had an option except to send them back to school. So what do you think in a scenario like that where you have one working parent or two working parents, and they're sitting here thinking, I have to go back to work. What do I do with my kids?
So, of course, there are options for parents. One option is that the kids would go back to school full time, according to our governor, at least 5 days a week. And that is an option for some kids. Parents feel like that would give their kids the opportunity to socialize with the other students, to settle back into a routine, and to be accountable for their work. While that is an option, I don't know if that's the best option for all children. Going back to school to socialize is going to be a little bit different right now when the children are expected to stay 6 feet away, possibly wear masks full time in the classroom, or wear a mask when they're less than 6 feet away. Recess will also be socially distanced, which makes it harder for children to socialize, to play the games that children are used to playing, to get the exercise that they usually get for their small and large motor skills. So while going back to school is an option, we do have more options as parents. And as teachers, we're looking for more options for teachers. But I've kind of stumbled across an option that would work well for myself, and it might work well for other teachers as well. Another option parents have would be to participate in distance learning. And what that would entail is their children staying home, tuning into a teacher's either live lesson via the internet, or a pre-recorded lesson, or an online version of their lesson. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for parents that are working, or for parents that are not home all day due to other obligations, or to families that have elderly in the house that need a little more time. So what some families have decided to do is to start what they call a pod. And a pod would be where a group of families would get together and they would form their alliance to help keep their children safe. So they might spend days over at another parent's house who's willing to help them learn. They might spend the morning at someone's house and transfer to a different house in the afternoon. And it could be that some of these pods are hiring teachers to join them as well.
And I like that idea, and I've heard that idea a lot. And I want to ask a question related to that idea in a second, but I want to back up a minute here, because one of the things that we were talking about is, and part of the reason that I think the pods developed is to help the accountability of the students. And I think when you're talking about a senior in high school or 11th grade, or I may even go back to 10th grade, a lot of those kids are getting ready to go to college. And so it's going to be that self-accountability piece. But, I have a kid going into third grade and a kid going into first grade. And so for me to try to distance learn, a pod may be a great idea, but for me to try to distance learn, how am I supposed to work and keep my kids accountable to the lessons that the teachers are providing them? I know there's a big change. When COVID first hit and schools basically shut down, there was this scramble by the school system to get e-learning in place. But I think that system has changed, hasn't it?
It has. The state of Florida really did the teachers right when it comes to education for spring distance learning. They provided us the opportunity to continue forward with education. Other states had told their teachers, don't do anything new. All you can do is review. You can't hold kids accountable because we don't know what their home life is like. So in my district, we were provided an online learning platform, which is fantastic. I had parents that worked. I had children that stayed home with older siblings, or maybe stayed at their grandparents' house while the parents worked. I spent an exorbitant amount of time online with my children during the daytime. We would spend from breakfast through lunch working together, which gave their parents an opportunity to work. So some of my children actually went to work with their parents, but they weren't tied to their parents because they were tied to my learning online. So I would keep them busy. I would keep them accountable. I use Zoom as my platform, and so I was able to do breakout rooms. So my children were able to still learn cooperatively together. And when you want to talk about that accountable piece, cooperative learning is one of your best accountable pieces, which is why the pods work very well. The children aren't just a matter of staying at a parent's house where they're not alone for the day, but they're learning to work cooperatively together. And a lot of the pods are actually hiring teachers to come work with them, either virtually or in person. And so that's kind of what I'm looking to do, is to work with students virtually. to help them through the day, whether it be an individual or a pod, and help them understand how cooperative learning helps them learn and how it helps to keep them accountable. And that works for your high school students as well. When they're able to get together either virtually or in person and work cooperatively together, the learning really accelerates.
I recall when we were talking, remind me again, you live in what county again? You live in?
So I live in Central Florida. I live in Lake County, which is about 45 minutes north of the Disney area.
Okay. But your company is, I would assume, either statewide or even potentially nationwide.
Yes. I'm definitely looking to reach out towards the country. I have friends across the country and different contacts. Because it's virtual, we're able to work with pretty much children around the world. Of course, my focus would be in the United States.
Right. And so when we talk about pods, one of the other things you and I talked about was, I recall that my kids' preschool in VPK made an offer to all the parents that we could send the kids there, and they would help handle the e-learning, the distance learning. And so my first comment there was, well, so if I'm afraid to send them back to school because I don't know what they're going to get, I don't know if they're going to contract COVID, or probably worse, they're going to be a carrier and bring it back to me, my wife, my in-laws, my wife's grandmother. I don't want to do any of that. I may be afraid of that. So instead, what I'm going to do is send them to their former daycare, where they're going to be around other kids and teachers and whatnot. So in my mind, what is the difference between sending them to go to school versus sending them to a daycare to distance learn or e-learn?
Sean, that's a great question. And I believe the best answer here is that when you send them to school, we're sending them to classrooms that are going to be reduced sizes, because we know we have a lot of children staying home. So I might have 10 or 15 children sitting in front of me in my classroom. I'm hoping that I can rely on my families to keep my children safe and germ-free. But not only am I relying on those 10 or 15 children, but on average, those kids come from about 5 different buses. Those buses on average will hold about 60 children. All right. So now I have 60 children on a bus times 5 buses. That's 300 children. That's 300 children's germs coming into my classroom with my 10 to 18 children. And so now not only am I exposed to my germs in my own classroom, but to the germs that come off their school bus, in addition to the ventilation system in the schools. The way our school is set up is we have one ventilation system that circulates the whole building, where we have about 200 children in our building. So again, the air that we're breathing is a mixture of many children. Whereas if you were to join a pod or go to a preschool setting, you've just now reduced the amount of families you're coming in contact with. And usually there is an understanding amongst smaller groups why it's so important to keep our children safe and germ-free.
Well, and I was going to say that, being in a reduced size classroom may be a better, if I send the kids to school and now we're talking about 15 to 18 kids versus 25 kids or something in that range. So we've got reduced size classrooms. But am I understanding correctly that what the schools may do is, if you're going to be a teacher that's going to do distance learning because you don't have enough kids to fill up your classroom, well, then you're going to go home, and then the teacher that is going to have the in-person classroom, they're just going to backfill that classroom. So we're still staying at those bigger size classrooms with other teachers at home. Am I understanding that?
Yes and no. In our district, when I was watching our district workshop, they were mentioning that our online classes might have up to 50 children in the classroom. We would have fewer online teachers. Now, don't quote me on that, but that's what our school board had mentioned early on in our process. So as teachers are looking for options to do distance learning, it might not actually be an option. So when we talk about choices, children have lots of choices. The teachers actually don't have as many. My choices were to teach in the classroom, or to take an early retirement, or to resign. In order for me to get a distance learning position, I would have to interview. And I can tell you there are not that many spots open from what I'm reading online. And we have hundreds of teachers. I am not immune compromised, so I do not fit the top of the list. I have seniority amongst my district, but not necessarily at my school. So the possibility of the majority of us getting an online classroom right now is seeming kind of slim. So what would happen is we would have smaller classroom sizes. So and then instead of me having 18 children in my classroom, I could potentially have 7 to 10, which would, again, reduce the amount of children in my classroom, reduce the my learning group, which would be fantastic. But we're still required to maintain our 6 feet separation and masks or masks at less than 6 feet. I know a lot of parents are not thrilled about that. And to be honest, as a classroom teacher, I really am having a hard time imagining in my own mind how that's going to work. Not to mention, I don't know that I would be able to teach for that many hours wearing a mask as well. So that kind of puts a little bit of restriction on that.
Yeah, and again, we go back to the accountability issue. So you got to, I don't know at what point, 7th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade is going to be a lot easier to have them wear a mask for an extended period of time than a first grader, second grader, third grader. But the question that occurred to me was, part of my understanding was that the classroom sizes really weren't going to change very much because they were going to split the teachers by whatever process. They were going to split the teachers between in-person, in-class learning and remote learning. But now, if as a parent, part of me is thinking, well, wait a minute. If I can send them to school to a classroom that has one teacher for every 7 to 10 kids versus have them online where it's one teacher for every 50 kids, they're a lot better off to do. They're easier to learn if it's a 1 to 7, 1 to 10 ratio versus a 1 to 50 ratio, which would seem to argue that it may be better to send them back to school. Even though we're all concerned about health and safety and knocking out this virus and getting rid of it, but a little selfishly as a parent, wouldn't it make more sense to send them where they can get 1 on 7 versus 1 on 50?
So I would agree as far as education-wise, 1 on 7 is much better than 1 on 50. But if we're looking at it health-wise, I think that it really does come down to parents' individual personal choice. It's really, really a tough choice. Again, I worry about the air conditioner system in many of the schools. And most schools across the northeast part of the United States don't even have air conditioning. And so when we start looking at other states, we have issues. I know that New York is selecting their teachers to do virtual online learning according to their BMI. And I thought that was very interesting. Huh. So if you're a New York City teacher and you have a BMI of 30 or more, you're considered high risk and you're allowed to do online learning. And I found that very interesting because, not to reveal my total secret, but my BMI is 29.5. And so I am just a few pounds away from being able to stay home and do online teaching.
If you're in New York.
If I was in New York, where I would be making a lot more money, by the way. But sure. So it's hard when you start looking at in classroom. I think it also depends on your teacher as well. Some teachers have their head wrapped around being able to deal with kids 6 feet away, not sharing devices, not sharing supplies, not getting near each other. How do you do that when you have a small classroom? Fortunately, I had a huge classroom. I was able to figure out in my mind my 6 feet squares, and I could fit a lot of kids in my classroom. Now, can I teach children that spread out across 40 feet? It's kind of hard because I'm used to doing collaborative learning where my kids are usually, if not sitting right on top of each other, sitting just inches away. And that's how my kids learn, collaboratively, working together, holding each other accountable. I cannot figure that part out 6 feet away.
Yeah, my sister is an elementary school teacher up in Leon County, which is the Tallahassee area, for those of you who don't know. And she took a picture and sent it to me a couple of weeks ago. She had gone into school to set up her classroom, and I think she could fit 20 chairs if everyone was 6 feet apart in her classroom. So she's got a max capacity in her classroom of 20 kids, assuming everyone's going to sit six feet apart. But then you get to the other issue of, my son, my older son, and both of them actually, there have been times where they've snuck stuff out of the house to bring to school for like an impromptu show and tell. And I can only imagine the chaos if they go to school with like a Pokemon card and they start trading Pokemon cards, and then they come home and the parents say, "Where did you get those?" "Well, I traded them at school." And then I know that there are some parents that will disinfect groceries, disinfect packages. And so there are some who believe, and I don't know, and my goal is not to debate the science, but there are those who believe that it can be transmitted that easily by touch, and then that might set off a whole firestorm of. I agree with you. It's a difficult issue. It's a complicated issue. So we talked about a lot of the students' needs in terms of social, emotional. We touched on academic needs. We touched on accountability, consistency. But I want to flip the script a little bit. The teacher needs. I mean, I want our teachers to be safe. I want all of our school staff to be safe. Is this really a safety issue, or is there more to it than that when we look at the teacher's point of view?
I do believe it's a teacher issue. We had a summer school class that was quarantined within a few days of summer school starting. We had a football team that was social distancing on the field until the storm hit, when they all ran into the locker room. It is a safety issue. I have taken this very seriously. Again, I am not immune compromised. I have health issues that do concern me. Being close to that 30 BMI concerns me, obviously. And I want to stay safe, not only for myself, but for my parents, for my husband. I have two very close friends that both have cancer, and they're going through cancer treatment. And they're the only two people that I hang out with, because I know that I'm keeping myself safe and clean for my two friends. So they have not retired. They have not resigned. They need the health insurance. So they are going back into school while actively going through radiation and chemotherapy, and breathing the air of the children across their building. It is a health concern. Teachers get together. We sit together for lunch. We cannot stay 6 feet apart any more than the children can. And if you watch conversations happen, people greet each other from 7 or 8 feet apart. And by the time they're done talking, they're about 4 feet, because I think 4 feet is our natural distance. So it looks great on paper. It looks fabulous on paper. Here's a map of your classroom. Here's where your kids should sit. This is where the flow goes in the hallway. This is how they walk in one direction. This is how we're going to stay socially distanced in the cafeteria. But the 1 minute a child can't hear another, the first thing they do is pop up out of their seat and lean over to see what the other child is saying, or to see what they're writing, or, to look at a math problem. And I think, again, on paper, it looks fabulous. In reality, I'm having a hard time with that.
Yeah, and we've got masks for our kids' size masks for our kids. But again, I have to constantly remind my younger son, pull it up over your nose, pull it up over your nose. And it's
somebody.
Yeah, it's not that he wants to get anybody sick. He just doesn't want, he's 6 years old. He's worried about wearing a mask. And so I wonder though, what I wonder though are some of the other types of classroom protocols. I mean, what's going to change now because of COVID in terms of the classroom itself?
I think teachers are accustomed to teaching children in small groups. We know that children learn better in small groups with children that are like-minded as them and need certain skills together. And so pulling a small group, keeping children 6 feet apart, is a stumbling block for me. I still haven't figured that part out. The other thing is, I have been trained over and over again. I am a Kagan trained teacher. I have attended plenty of Get Your Teach On. I know how to get kids talking. I know how to get kids interacting. I know how to get them working collaboratively. I don't know how to get them to work separately. I have no clue how to teach children in the COVID classroom.
But isn't that a skill that they would have to develop at some point anyway, in terms of working independently? I mean, I remember what opened my eyes when I got to college was, hey, if you don't do what you need to do, it's not, and we had study groups even in law school. Some of my best friends today I made because we were in self-made study groups for law school. But even then, when it came time to prepare for exams, when it came time to do all that stuff, I was in the library studying by myself. So isn't there some good that can come out of trying to teach kids to be a little bit more self-reliant? Again, understanding that, do I really want to teach my 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old? Do I really want to start those lessons today?
Right. So that might be a skill that we would start honing in more on as, like you say, as you get older. But studies show time and time again, children who are working collaboratively are learning at a higher rate, both your higher students and your lower students.
Okay. Well, one other question that I had from your bio, 7 years working at the district level as a technology integration specialist. Now, I don't mean this with any disrespect to any teacher. However, we had a couple of snags in at the end of last school year because the teachers didn't understand the technology, or didn't know, some of the teachers didn't know how to work the technology. And again, I'm not trying to pick on any particular teacher. There were some aspects of the technology that I had to learn to figure out. But I guess my question there is, with your background in technology and technology integration, how do we know for those kids that are doing e-learning or distance learning, when does a technology help and when does it hinder?
Right. And that's a great question. Like I said, I spent 7 years teaching teachers, and I felt like sometimes I would do the same lesson over and over again with the same teachers. And I do believe that technology frame of mind really is not necessarily something that all teachers have. And that's fine, because we were originally taught, unless you're a millennial and just coming out of college within the last few years, we were taught to teach without technology. So that's what we know to do. Just kind of like we're taught to teach with collaboration. That's what we know to do. So now we're asking teachers to try a new skill. I started using technology in my classroom years and years before iPads even came out, learning how to get children to work together, writing together, thinking together, processing together. So now we're asking teachers to use Chromebooks or iPads. And not all teachers believe in technology, which is absolutely fine. And I think that it's a personal opinion. I used iPads in my classroom as my students' textbooks, as my students' writing devices, as my students' communication devices. I used it as a student response system. So every time I asked a question, 100% of my children could answer that question. And I could see every single one of their answers before I even closed the question. So I could prompt them for more information. Now, I brought that system to my home learning as well. So as I was working with my children in the spring, I was using my response systems. So I have 10 or 15 kids online with me in a Zoom class, and I'm asking them questions, and I can see the responses, but they're not sharing the responses verbally. All right. So now, again, we're holding kids accountable. Not all teachers use technology the way I do. That's fine. It's all, personal preference. But you're right. A lot of teachers don't understand how to use an online learning platform or how to use it to benefit their children. Technology would not necessarily replace the teacher, but it can enhance their lessons depending on which applications we're using.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge my wife and I are trying to figure out. One of the challenges my wife and I are trying to figure out now is, I've got the desktop computer that I'm using to talk to you and record this episode and do all that stuff. And then I've got my iPad that I use to run the law firm. But then outside of that, we've got 2 kids. And so if I'm on my iPad and one of my kids is on this computer, where's the other kid? And I think they both have Amazon Kindles or Amazon Fires. And so from that perspective, they have a tablet, but it's almost to the stage of, am I going to have to upgrade my technology so my kids can distance learn? Do I have to buy another computer? Is the school system going to provide computers? Where are they going to get the funding to provide for computers? And so there's some of those other technology questions that come up as well.
I'm understanding that the CARES Act was to buy technology in addition to other things, but they were able to buy technology with the CARES Act, I do believe.
Okay.
In my district, they provided every family with a Chromebook. Every family that needed it received a Chromebook. And so this year, every child will have a Chromebook of their own. So if we do go back home for distance learning, they'll have their own devices.
Okay. And frankly, I've studied the CARES Act in terms of bankruptcies and foreclosures and loan modifications. I didn't really look at it from that perspective. So thank you. I appreciate that. Anything sort of as we get to the end, anything that we didn't I do want to remind everybody again that Home to School Connection is a consulting company designed to help parents and students understand how to successfully homeschool, distance learn, information that they should need if they're going back to in-class learning. But is there anything that we didn't cover, anything that you wanted to mention?
Right. So I would like to add definitely that what I would provide for the parents and the children is that connection, that personal connection. So if the child is doing homeschool or online learning, distance learning, and they're not getting that personal connection that they need, or they need a little more assistance in what the teacher is providing them, that's what I'm here for. I want to help children learn how to learn on their own, or to create groups of children from across the state that can learn collaboratively together. I'm also here to help the parents understand how they can help their children. I know that when we send kids home with homework, the parents are like, I just can't even deal with this homework. And now we're asking them to deal with everything. And so I have a lot of ideas and suggestions to help the parents that I share routinely with my parents of my children in my classroom. So I'm definitely here to help the parents understand how to help their kids learn. I'm here to bring children together, distance learning, so they can work collaboratively, work one-on-one with children that need either remediation to catch up with their peers, or for those that are accelerated, how to help them carry on further down the line.
Very nice. Well, thank you. I really, this is not an easy discussion. I mean, we've got to balance our needs as parents with the needs of our children to be educated, with the needs of the teachers and the school staff to be and remain safe. So it is definitely not an easy decision. We made the decision that we thought was best, but I'm not going to criticize any family or any parent for making whatever decision, or any teacher for making whatever decision that they felt was necessary in their best interest. It's not, I don't think there's a straight answer. I don't think there's a good answer one way or the other. It's definitely an interesting topic to consider. So I would encourage you, if you have questions, for the listeners, if you have questions about e-learning, about distance learning, about keeping your kids accountable, about making sure that they have the right tools, the right information, the right communication, reach out to Kellyann. Contact her. And again, it's Kellyann at home2schoolconnection.com. Home to school, the number 2 is a number, not spelled out. Or you can go visit her website, again, home2schoolconnection.com. Thank you, Kellyann. I appreciate you being a guest on this week's episode.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, and so a little bit of a different topic, but I think a timely topic for the podcast today. Like I say towards the end of every episode, I hope that you have more money at the end of the month, not more month at the end of the money. And certainly this plays in that there are different financial implications depending on whether you decide to homeschool or school in person or distance learn or whatever. So those financial aspects may factor in here as well a little bit. But I think that will do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.